Hey, everybody. So I'm going to walk you through the use of the ethical choices with educational technology framework. We're going to go through node by node, step by step, using the game Civilization 6 so that we can do an evaluation. So this is the tool that I want to use, that first node. I'm going to go ahead and start and create the game. I'm just going to do a random leader and just get this all set up so that I can start evaluating it. It's always a good idea to be using the product while you're thinking it through rather than just trying to remember, uh, especially when you're using a complex tool. So the first thing that I'm going to think about as this loads up is, are there clearly stated learning or teaching benefits expected from the tool? This is the first question we ask you to consider in the ECET framework. This dates back to my time as a middle school English and social studies teacher and coach. Back then in the 90s, ed tech generally was a VHS player and a copy of the musical 1776 for a lot of the coaches that I worked with. They didn't really have any ideas about how the technology was expected to benefit the students. They had no lesson plan around it. There was nothing that they could point to and say, yes, here's a clearly defined learning or teaching benefit. And if you can't figure that out, maybe you don't want to do it. So, a civilization, I can think of a bunch of possible learning or teaching benefits. I can expose students to one idea of how civilizations may have evolved over time. I also know from my own readings and experience that Sid Meier and the company that produced this worked with educators and professors, including people I know personally, um, to develop a lot of the curriculum and educational aspects of the game back around Civilizations 4 and 5. A lot of that, I believe, is continued in a 6. So I can see how I could potentially use this to support student learning by simulating the evolution of civilization as we kind of sort of understand it. But I can also use it to have students critique our understanding of civilization from a social studies perspective in this instance. A lot of this stuff's not super accurate. It's a game. It's a simulation game. It's great. But sometimes teaching is about getting students to confront things that they might think are wrong and teaching them how to think, not necessarily what to think. So this could be pretty beneficial. So coming into the game, is there clear evidence that the tool will support student learning? Again, I am aware of the research on Civilization, older versions like Civilization 3, Civilization 4, some on Civilization 5. And I believe that there's enough evidence to support the idea that students can learn from exposure to playing this game. So I feel pretty good about that moving forward. Next node, how will the tool be used for teaching and learning? I already kind of described that. I'm going to have the kids play it. And part of what we're going to do is have them actually talk about their experiences of play. And from their readings, I will ask them to compare what they think they know from the readings versus what they experienced in the game. How is one similar or different than the other? Do some comparison and contrast, get back into that Bloom's taxonomy. Try to get them to engage in higher order thinking, to challenge what they think they know about evolution of history, going from reading about it to playing a game that models something about how history works. So that's kind of where I'm going to get started. Our are there any other resources I need to make it work? Well, the kids are going to need to have a PC. This is not going to work on Chromebooks. So in this instance, I may need to have a computer lab that has this installed. So I think that could actually work pretty well in my instance because I have access to that. I would need somebody who can do the installation. So this might need to be imaged on a computer. So there will be some steps involved in getting everything ready for this. It's not going to be just an immediate moving forward. Um, I'll have to do some planning. It may take me an entire 6 weeks to get the kids ready with other activities leading up to this and making sure that the computers are ready. So that could be a potential limitation of my idea. I have easy access to Chromebooks, but I may not have access to the desktops or laptops that can actually run it. Further, may have to have Steam installed if I can only get it off of Steam. So there are some challenges in terms of the resources that I need to make this work, whether it's technological resources, human resources. That's potential limitations in my idea here. And then finally, is it frustrating for me to use as the teacher? I've been playing this same dumb game since 1993, since Civilization 1. So no, it is not frustrating for me to use. I'm perfectly happy to play Civilization forever. That's fun. So that gets me through my idea lane. I feel like by the end of answering these questions, I think it's a pretty good idea. There are some potential limitations that are more tied into the feasibility of it around the resources that I need in order to make this work. And so the next thing that I'm asked to think about is the feasibility. So does my school have access to the tool, or would they be willing to do it? Yes. I'm going to go ahead for the purposes of this simulation of the application of this tool and say yes. School would have access to it, would be willing to do it. Maybe I have a grant that supports its installation, or the school district supports it, whatever it is. I'm going to go ahead and answer yes. Will students have access to the technology? Yes. Again, the school would have access. Would my students have access? Now, one of the things about accessibility in this instance that is concerning, though, that we would need to think about in this space is it goes beyond just, do I have access where I can turn on the computer and turn on Civilization? It goes to, are there limitations to my students' accessibility that could limit this? Do they have a visual impairment? Is there an auditory impairment that maybe my students have that could make playing the game harder? I know the auditory one's probably not a big issue because I actually have been playing with the sound off on Civilization for 20 years. So I'm less concerned about that. But the visual aspect of it could be problematic. So in that instance, in order to deal with that issue, I may have to have a student with a visual impairment play with a sighted player so that they are working together and that the visually impaired student has agency and choices in this instance with the technology. So I may have to have some other solutions in this instance to make this work for somebody that has a visual impairment. And that's okay. But this is part of what we're trying to get you to think about in this node is not just do they have access to the tool, but is the accessibility there so students can actually use it. And then next we have, do I or my students need training to use the tool? This is always a big challenge with that tech. Not everything's super easy to use. Sometimes the directions are terrible. Part of the reason that I am less concerned about this is I've been playing as Peter here. I'm gonna save my game. And I'm gonna go ahead and exit to the main menu because I want to illustrate how Civilization offers training to students who are playing it and teachers. Maybe you're trying to do this with multiple teachers, not just one. Some products need professional development. You have to have external teaching. I use something called Systemic Tool for doing systems analysis and system visualization when I do my other hat with logistics and operations management. However, it's really hard to use and the training isn't very good. So in that instance, I would say, hey, you actually need to have really robust training. One of the benefits to civilization that has always been in there is the game teaches you how to play it. It gives you tips. You have advisors built into the game who are going to provide you with information and recommendations about what to do. This is different than many other games that are out there. One of the reasons that I feel like both the teachers and the students would potentially have a good experience with this is that there's a low threshold to entry with this game. So, do students and teachers have access to training to use the tool? Yes, it's built in. Is the tool easy enough for students to use with minimal help? I believe so. I believe that there is enough scaffolding built into the game that students can follow along with minimal help and support. Next is there IT support? I'm assuming that this is a school that has either an instructional technology specialist full-time, maybe it's middle school or high school, or somebody that serves as a media specialist / librarian and instructional technology specialist who can offer that IT support. Or because the game has a lot of self-direction, I personally have decent tech skills. I feel like I can support moving this all forward in a meaningful way, so I'm okay with this one. Can the tool be used in the amount of available time? This is one of the bigger concerns because civilization can take a while to play. Therefore, I may have to scale back, going back to the idea, how much I think I want students to be able to do. What is the tool going to be used for? Is my intention to have them play an entire game of civilization, which could take many hours, or simply to introduce them to maybe the first 50 turns or 100 turns in the game so that they can get exposed to early ideas about civilization, because that ties into my teaching and learning goals. So it may be that the game only lends itself to certain ideas. Can it be done in the amount of available time? It depends on what my goals are. I may have to revise those in order to make this all work. It may not be perfect, but because it is a turn-based game, every student may get to a different place, but it may be the place they need to get to in the amount of time that they have. And that's fine. I think that's works for my purposes. So my goal may not be to expose them to the entire arc of history according to how civilization functions in this instance, but simply a period of time that I think is important for them to be exposed to. And I think for this game, it is feasible to do it in that space. Is this required student effort to use the tool appropriate? Yeah, this is easy. You're just clicking on stuff. It's not super hard. If you do it at a low enough level, the challenge of the game isn't excessively hard. And so you're not going to have students get super frustrated and upset. That takes us through the feasibility. Now, next we have the ethics lane. So we go from our idea, is it a good idea, to is it feasible to implement this idea, to is it ethical to implement this idea, this tool, this game, this curriculum. So the first question that we ask, and it gets back to my early concern, which is it going to be used as filler or to reach learning outcomes? When I was a young lad, I was department chair of a social studies department in a school in a not super exciting area of Houston. And back in the 90s, most of the social studies teachers were also coaches, and they were coaches I worked with because I was also a coach. The vast majority of the coaches didn't really want to teach. Not all of them, but the vast majority. So they showed a lot of movies, and it was filler. They weren't teaching to prepare the students for the tests. They were just trying to get through the day. So if I am evaluating this game. Am I thinking of it as filler? No. I feel like there are specific learning goals and objectives that I'm trying to reach with this that are valuable. Once I've decided that, I have to think about, is the instruction supported by the tool likely to be effective? So earlier on, I was looking to see if there was clear evidence that the tool will improve student learning. And I feel like the evidence is strong enough that the instruction that I want to do is supported by that research and that evidence, that I believe that it can be effective based on other activities that I've done in the classroom that were not game based or were game based but were manual, analog. I feel like this does some of those things, and it does it in a way that it takes some of my effort away in terms of having to do classroom management and other work that prevents me from spending more time giving feedback and working with students to help talk through their ideas. It also gives me a lot of content and information for students to think through and talk about that can aid in their learning. Does the tool meet ADA accessibility compliance requirements? That is a big question. And so, since I don't know, what I'm going to do is I have a plan for working around it by having students work in pairs or in teams to support any students with any sort of disability. But what I'm going to look at, I'm going to do a little Google search. Early demo for a Civilization 6 screen reader access mod. That was last year in May. System accessibility settings. Has some system-wide accessibility settings, and Switch has some built-in features, lockable zoom. The PC has extensive accessibility features, including color correction from voice recognition to input device emulators. So I'm playing this on the PC, so that's pretty good. PlayStation 4, some accessibility. Inverting colors, button mapping, that's pretty good. Xbox has Copilot share controls and adaptive controller support. So it may be that for students that have accessibility issues, I might want to have them play on the Xbox One or the PC exclusively because it has that accessibility support. So I think that from an ethics standpoint, I can potentially ethically use this with students that have disabilities because there are ways to make this work. Is it going to be perfect? Probably not, but very little is. So I feel like I can ethically move forward on that node. Is there any aspect of the technology that might be harmful to student learning or health? This is always the question. And many years ago, when I first was thinking about using Civilization, a lot of the time I had significant concerns dating back to Civilization 3. There's another Civilization game called Colonization. And so part of my concern in that instance was that it could harm student learning. A lot of the things in Civilization are unrealistic. You aren't going to have Gandhi and Genghis Khan battling for global supremacy against one another. Further, back then in Civilization 3, 4, 5, a lot of the time the personalities of the leaders that you were playing as were randomly generated, not necessarily representative of what the real world leaders were like. So my concern was that it might teach bad mental models. It might teach some students the wrong things about historical figures, about some aspects of civilization. And after reading a book yesterday regarding allegories of the Anthropocene, one of the things that they noted is that we learn really well from stories, and it leads us to engage in change when we learn from allegorical depictions of things. And a lot of what happens in Civilization is an allegorical depiction of how civilization unfolds, how civilizations come into conflict, into cooperation. And so if the game doesn't present and simulate civilization with a reasonable amount of fidelity, students may learn the wrong things. And that could lead to really serious negative mental models where they're hard to fix, they're hard to break those bad mental models, or some that are just kind of difficult. But in either instance, you may lose instructional time as you have to go back and reteach these things so students aren't walking away with the wrong impression. So I did have some concerns about that, especially in the way that people were using civilization 20 years ago to teach, which was, I'm going to have them play and just see what happens. There was a lot of just exploration. However, I feel like if my learning goals and objectives require students to challenge what they think they're understanding, and that is a regular component of the curriculum that they're engaged in with the game, that challenge can continuously help regulate what they are learning, how they're learning it, and allow me to see if they are learning bad mental models around historical concepts, social studies constructs, whatever it is, and then I can reteach and help modify those through that discourse. But critical discourse is going to be super important in this. Now, next is, can student performance be measured ethically? I'm not really using anything within the game to measure student performance. I don't care if they're successful at getting a domination victory or a diplomacy victory or anything else. Their performance in the game is irrelevant. What I care about is getting them to explain what they're learning in the game and to get them to challenge what they think they're learning and what they think they know. So in this instance, my performance evaluation is something I'm doing. I'm going to develop rubrics. I am going to take it from informal discourses with the students. So I feel like that can be measured ethically. Next up is, who owns the data? Who provides the technology? Well, as far as I know, I own my own save games. I don't know how much is being communicated back to the company. So I think it's pretty ethical. I don't believe that the student data is being collected. I don't think they know who these students are. So I'm okay with that. I think I own my own data, the students own theirs. I feel like overall, in the next node, the technology comes from a fairly trustworthy company. They've worked with educators in the past for a long time. Overall, they seem to be an okay company to work with. The student data, not really worried about the differentiation of instruction. They're not selling the data. So I'm okay with that in the next node. And then, is the tool's primary use surveilling and controlling student classroom behavior? That does not seem to be what they're doing at all. This isn't something where it's tracking their movements or anything to see what they're doing in the classroom and capturing their performances on tests or anything. It's a game, it's a simulation game. And so it's just a different way of going about things. So those are all the questions in the ethics lanes at this point. And now we're moving into the final evaluation. At the end of the day, based on what I think I know, can I know that the tool is effective? Well, because I'm developing this myself, I feel like I can. I feel like I've set goals and objectives for this. And if I reach them, then I'll feel like my choice and use of this was effective. Then is, do I have the technology and human resources needed to use the tool? I think that I can get them. I think that it can be had in my situation, so I'm okay with that. And then, is the tool usable given my training and students' abilities? Yeah, I think because the tool itself teaches them how to use it, that students will be able to do this effectively. Overall, do I believe that I can use this ethically? Yes. I think that I can design a curriculum around this for, say, 4 weeks for students to engage with this game that is going to allow them to learn something that I think is valuable. And by doing this, by asking these questions, we go beyond the traditional there's a tool, it looks kind of cool, I'm going to play with it, to is there an educational purpose? Can I use this tool for that educational purpose? And is it ethical to use that with my students in a way that's going to help them learn? But the big question we always have to come back to is, should I use it?